On this episode of Narcissist Apocalypse, we talk with an abuse survivor named Heidi. And Heidi was raised by a controlling narcissistic father. It's a story of intergenerational trauma, scapegoats, enmeshment, fragmented identity, minimization, denial, and the healing journey. Welcome to Narcissist Apocalypse, everyone. I am Brandon Chadwick, and with me today we have Heidi. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Well, I am doing well, and thank you for being here, Heidi. And if you want to be a guest like Heidi is today, please do go to our website at narcissistapocalypse.com. Top of the page, there's a button that says guest form. When you click on that button, it takes you to our guest form page, and there you can read all of our instructions and either send us an email at narcissistapocalypse@gmail.com or fill out our guest form and press the submit button. And please do send it in the format that we ask for. And today we have a content warning for this episode, as we do discuss sexual abuse in this episode, and it is from Heidi's parent, and Heidi is not a child when this happens. So this is our content warning for this episode. And today you're going to hear Heidi's life story, and she was the scapegoat of her family, and you're going to hear and feel her whole life today, all of her struggles and the breakthroughs that she's had lately as well. So just a really big thank you to Heidi for being here. And now I'm going to get out of my way and your way. Heidi, the floor is now yours.
Thank you. It's a bit strange being here, and I've listened to your show quite a lot, and it's really helped me with understanding the kind of family dynamic that I came from and how that's impacted me throughout my whole life, really. And at the moment, I'm going through a really interesting phase of my life for the last year or so, where a lot of the foundations that I've built in life have just crumbled. And also, I've got to the stage where things really came to a head with my family. And I've been going through, since the end of May, really, a kind of period of massive epiphany. It's just been astonishing. I can't keep up quite with the amount of realizations, the amount of aha moments, the amount of piecing it all together, which kind of happened quite suddenly recently. And I'm tingling thinking about it. My skin is quite astonishing where I've come to in terms of, this mindset about who I am in relation to, and individually in relation to, my family has just kind of crumbled away and left like a kernel underneath of amazingly positive person who didn't know she existed completely. You'll see there's kind of a transition of kind of aha moments throughout life, really, that kind of help to piece together who I am. But I've spent the last 48 years, and I am 48. I feel like I was living in a cult, and I've just come out of a cult, and it is mind-blowing. And at the same time, a lot of things like housing in the UK, the rental crisis, I had to move out of a house. I now have a completely different lifestyle, living in a truck, a converted truck in a field. So that's just a complete kind of upending of, what you understand to be the security of where you live. At the same time, I've had to go no contact with my mum, my dad, and my sister. And we'll get to that a little later on, but I'm really in a process of grieving, but also of kind of shedding a lot of the layers of can I swear?
Yes.
Crap that I've been carrying around, basically. So basically, I suppose I wanted to kind of start with earlier on in my life. I will explain, the kind of traits in my dad and the dynamic as we go through. But I'm just thinking of an incident that kind of encapsulates really the bind I was in as a child, because I wanted to go to my parents for comfort, and I was met with abuse, essentially emotional and physical violence. not all the time, but a substantial portion of the time, enough to have a devastating effect on my life and how I see myself and my capabilities and what I can and can't do. Really, it's been quite hindering to go through what I've been through. And it's my whole life. So it's mad that I'm figuring a lot of this out. And I think education's been really important because you adopt such a kind of cloak of reality that's not yours. It kind of smothers your own. And just, I forgot where I was.
It's okay that you forgot where you were. You know, for everyone that's listening, the story that you're about to hear is one of your denial and minimization of your actual existence. And I think that is a big theme that everyone is going to hear today from your story. And that you being the scapegoat of this family, you carried all of their stuff for them. And
that's right, really.
And you're now going to, I guess, tell us a brief little bit about of who your parents were and where they came from, because they're carrying whatever they had and they're going to now unload it on you. And eventually your sister does become part of that process as well. So I guess tell us who they are.
Yeah. So my dad had me when he was 20 and my mum was 17 years old. So they were very young and they came from dysfunctional families themselves, from what little I really know about it, because my mum wouldn't talk about the past. She was she would say, it's boring, I don't want to talk about it. You know, if you're having a drink with your family, you start kind of wanting to discover more about your life. Or when I was little, wanting to discover more about my mum's life, it was very much shut down. We didn't really talk about it. My mum's mum committed suicide when I was 1. And so I put it down to just the trauma of that. And, you know, that her life was very difficult. I'm not going to go into it specifically, but, you know, her parents were, my granddad was an alcoholic. He was fun, he was great, but, you know, I don't think he did a particularly good job as a parent. And, you know, my grandma, who I don't remember, was always in bed depressed and stuff a lot of the time. So, you know, you can kind of put 2 and 2 together and imagine what it must have been like for my mum to sort of grow up in, I suppose, emotional neglect really she might have experienced, but there was nothing talked about of any kind of violence or anything. So, and that's my mum. And so she left school at 15 and then met my dad when she was 16. He was having an affair with her while seeing another woman he was seeing for 4 years. So he had my mum on the side and she absolutely adored him, and she still does. She worships the ground he walks on. And, you know, she knew about it. I think she certainly did at some point, and she accepted it because she loved him so much. And I think, you know, coming from a background where you are deprived of the care and the love that you need from a family, somebody shows you affection, somebody kind of wants to be with you, you know, respond very well to that. And I think because her home life was so difficult, he was a way out of that at a very young age. And she got pregnant with me. So she was just 17 when she got pregnant. And I remember working out that their wedding anniversary was in November and I was born in February. So that kind of gave me an idea of the kind of circumstances of them getting together and how I don't know if they were pressured to marry, but you know, God bless him, he did the right thing for what you're supposed to do in the 1970s and married my mum. But she did tell me, this is sort of a family story that I've absorbed, that he sat her down when they just got married and said, I don't love you. I might grow to love you. And my mum spent earlier years with me at home a lot of the time while my dad was out at the pub with her own father. because they became friends. You know, I know he was there, but you know, she has said in the past that, you know, she spent quite a bit of time dealing with things on her own, and she's, you know, she can be quite an anxious person. She's got this new child. She's 17 years old. You know, it's like a bomb going off in your life when you have a child, you know, and being so young. I mean, she'd left school at 15, so she had more maturity than I did at 17, but still, it must have been so hard for her. And knowing that you're not, you know, loved like you want to be, and being so in love must have also been very difficult. And um, for him, I was a bomb going off in the family that it's so complicated and so hard to explain the dynamic that enabled him to survive really through how he related to me, how he treated me. It's as if he's so far into his comfort zone and has to stay there, or there is annihilation outside the walls of his comfort zone. He can't cope with any kind of environment that scratches against him, that interferes with his comfort, his viewing of the TV, his laying on the only large sofa. So us girls are all on a small sofa, just this sort of way of arranging us really in a kind of dynamic that served his comfort. So in comes a baby. You know, he was a trainee accountant and he had to give that up because the wages weren't as good. So he became a bus driver. And I used years later on in life trying to figure out why he treated me like he did. I sort of thought, well, maybe he resented the fact that he had to give up a career. You know, that was one of my early kind of hypotheses, because I have always had a niggling sense that things are wrong, and it's driven me to figure it out. Anyway, so I'm a baby, I'm a bomb that goes off in their world. And I was doing a PhD and studying a lot of like child psychology. I was in the School of Social Work, and later impact of that. And it's like parents are supposed to revolve around their children for care, because their child is so vulnerable, they can't look after themselves. And someone like my dad, everything had to revolve around him. So instantly there's competition really for comfort and security and love. But there wasn't any love to go round, you know, there really wasn't. So I've arrived, and, you know, I can't really obviously remember much before my sister arrived, which was 2 years later, but I was apparently quite a jumpy child. I didn't like to be left in a room on my own. I always had abandonment feelings. I do remember abandonment dreams. And my mum once said to me, you couldn't be in a room on your own, but with a 6-month-old baby, you were quite happy. And it's just, I think I developed this extreme, deep sense of like loneliness, and that if I didn't have proximity to someone or even like a baby, I just felt this chronic sort of sense of emptiness and abandonment, you know. One of the earliest sort of incidents that I remember where I was just abused, frankly, and this was sort of habitual, was I was a little girl. I must have been about 4, and I'm walking down the street with my dad, and I was a chatty little girl. I was really eager to connect, as well as being frightened and nervous. I just really loved people and like enjoyed seeing their faces light up in my presence, and I liked to interact. And you know, I think I had difficulty controlling that vivacity, that life force, whatever it was, because I just chunted on, chatting away, and I had my hands in my pockets, and I fell over. It's a little pea coat with patch pockets on the front, and I just smashed my forehead, total face plant. Obviously, I can imagine, I can't really remember, but there's this sort of, like kids do, this sort of sudden rising wail of like pain. And this is a sort of actions that would come next at things like this. He kind of towered down, lunging over me, roughly grabs an arm, yanks me up from the pavement, and I sort of spin around his legs because he's got hold of one arm, you know, on tippy toes, and then he gives me a massive whack on my bum. And not only am I in pain because there's a like egg-sized lump rapidly forming on my forehead, I get slapped for it. And this sort of demonstrates the bind I was in. You want comfort from the person that is causing you terror, essentially. And it's a very confusing place to be for a child. It's not kind of a natural next reaction for someone that's supposed to love and care for you to suddenly just rain down violence on you. And probably wasn't a massive whack, but when you're a child and you're being smacked in a place that doesn't logically deserve that punishment, it's a triviality. I'm in pain. And what it was, I worked out, was because I had my hands in my pockets and he'd recently told me not to have my hands in my pockets. So that was the transgression. And there were just so many pointless trivialities that used to just trigger this enormous rage in him that he would often meet down on me, sometimes my mum. My sister, 2 years younger than me, managed to sort of stay under the radar with him. With her, he played with her, he enjoyed her, she was his tomboy. And I remember the soul-crushing rejection of, like, they're playing and I go and like join in, and then the game stops. There's a scowl from him, and it's all over, and I can't really join in with the fun. And it's really sad to sort of think of that little girl that went through all that, really. And I can't really figure where my mum was in this as well. Really, a lot of it is sort of bystander at one end to joining in some way, but a more kind of insidious teasing, we were only joking, kind of little sort of thread of cruelty and sarcasm with her, really. But certainly no intervention, really. There was one time, this is a classic example of the amount of intervention in my safety, really. There was one time when I must have been about 8 or 9, and I was petrified of absolutely everything. The dogs, thunder and lightning, my dad, the dark. I was just such a scared little girl. I couldn't eat properly because my stomach was really clenched, and yet I was forced to stay at the table and squeeze food in me. Such an anxious kid, very skinny. So I'm in bed, the little single bed in a small box room, and there's a massive thunderstorm. And because I'm petrified of thunderstorms, I call out for help. Silly me, obviously, but I'm that scared of the thunderstorm that I risk the wrath of the beast, So I call out, and then there's this flinging open of his bedroom door, a flinging open of my bedroom door, hits the wall. There's a big sort of 3-tiered Cindy house next to my bed, and he just swipes his arm across the top of it, knocking it over and knocking all the toys and things out of it, and he's literally growling, like, but I can't do it. But he is so apoplectic with rage because I've asked for help. This becomes a theme, really, with him. My nervous system seems to trigger his nervous system. We don't fit, and he just wants to. He can't, I say he can't help himself, but I think he can, and I'll demonstrate that later. But, there's this sense that I set off some kind of reaction in him, and I can't work out what that is. I'm doing reasonable things that a child would do to get safety met, really, and I never could. I was so alone. My mum, basically, with that situation, I heard her shout from the bedroom, "Leave a light on for her." And that was her intervention, not, "What are you doing? You're frightening her, you violent man," or stepping in. It was just such a normalized part of our family lives.
So when it comes to your mom's relationship with your dad, how did that interaction go within their relationship? Is your mom, equally as bad as him, or is she just like enabling everything that's going on? Is she scared of him in any sort of way? And then in relation with you and your sister, at a very young age, is your sister already disliking you?
Yeah, we'll get on to my sister in a minute, but yeah, my mum's relationship, like I touched on earlier, with my dad, she's very, very in love with him. He's the center of everything. As she had few friends when we were younger, like work friends or the odd person from her past. But as time's gone on, she doesn't need anyone. She doesn't want any friends. She used to go out on work dues sometimes, but she got older, she didn't. And they had a good life. They went on a couple of holidays a year. They went to music festivals because they were so young when they had me. When they got to their 30s, they were going to things like that. So my mum used to say that they had parallel lives, and I wondered about that because she was very much a career woman and she brought home the money, and he had the jobs with the least responsibility because he couldn't cope with it. So she was enabling him to have quite a sort of comfy existence. This is later on when sort of family settled into a rhythm, and I would have been getting towards teenage years. So she worships the ground he walks on. She bends to his will. She's sort of molded from a very young age to almost like serve his needs. He has such a, I don't know whether it's codependent. I tend not to try and use too much terminology to understand my family, because I think when you use terms, sometimes that kind of blurs and adds a template on situations that aren't necessarily that easy to define. But yeah, she certainly was very much in love with him. He had to have everything how he wanted. And as long as she catered towards that, then there would be relative calm in him. It's like he had to have, for him to have emotional stability, he had to have lots of conditions met, including like lighting, heating, TV set up so it's perfect for his view. He couldn't care less how anyone else saw it. We had to be silent when we watched TV. So mum would sort of, make sure that happened. We got told off if we spoke. She just sort of skittered around him, really. There was one time I remember when I'd come back to visit them in later life, but he was always like this. It's like he gets home from work and he's always had a bad day because everyone is incompetent. Everyone is less than him, although he's so socially awkward. He can't actually interact very well with people. He gets so angry. He's just a mess in that respect, really. But he wants friends, but he struggles. So he gets home from work with one of his beefs against the company, probably. And what happens is he drops his bag. He then goes across the dining room to the place where he chucks his money. Then he goes and sorts his coat out. And while he's going around his routine of getting back, the atmosphere is just electric with his rage. You could I always felt it, and I'll get on to a bit more of that. The air's thick with it, and I'm just so tense, even though it's not directed at me. It just triggers something in me that is so frightening. And so my mum in those situations is almost like hovering around him, talking to him, trying to sort of like let him rants, which doesn't really contribute a lot. There's no point trying to calm him down. It needs to run its course. And it's just everyone in a room has to be in the same mood as him. If anyone else is, I don't even know if it's deliberate. He just can't handle anyone outside himself, really. And yet my mum is so directed towards him and his needs, whereas I see affection from him sometimes with her, and they're quite jokey and playful, a little double act. But when the chips are down, it's all about him, really, and he is lighter around her when all his conditions are met and he's having a more stable time. So yeah, I would imagine you would call it codependent, and later we'll talk about the sort of events that led up to me going no contact. But when I wanted to go no contact with my dad, my mum said we're a unit. You can't have one without the other. It's just impossible. So very enmeshed, and that kind of enmeshment was something I struggled to get away from until about 10 years ago, really, when something went on that I need to talk about later. But, I was enmeshed with them. And because of the way I was forming as a person, very unconfident, low self-esteem, loads of shame, loads of self-disgust that I couldn't place, self-contempt. I just hated myself because I just saw myself as the projection that was coming out of him. I absorbed a lot of his kind of mood. And yeah, we were pretty enmeshed. So I think because I struggled socially and was very kind of anxious, and I closed down quite a lot, and so I didn't have friends over. The atmosphere was too heavy, so that in a sense kind of atmosphere isolates people. How people with narcissistic traits tend to want absolute control over you. And so that is, it's such a bad atmosphere in my house, so I don't have friends coming.
So at a very young age here, you said the word enmeshment, and it feels like there's this cycle in what you just said where they've made you feel like you don't matter at a very young age. Your dad is the ringleader of that. Your mom is enabling that. Mm-hmm. You have no safe place to go. You become this frightened child. And then because of that, it makes you a little bit socially awkward when it comes to other kids and difficulty making friends.
Yes.
And because of that difficulty of making friends, you then need to overly rely on your family as a means to socialize and be accepted. So this enmeshment then kind of occurs at a little bit of a deeper level because you're rejected in both aspects of life, from your family and from these kids, but your family's always there. So since you're there with them the dominant amount of time, you're now going to really be there to try and be accepted. It may have been different if you were a little bit socially accepted by other kids. You might have had a place to go to get away from and find acceptance there. But because of that, it might ingrain you a little bit further than, we hear a lot about enmeshment on our show. But in this case, for you were going to be enmeshed most likely with them anyway, but this might take it a little bit deeper, which is why it took you possibly so long to have a lot of these realizations, because people are going to hear your story today and realize, it wasn't until you made friends later on in life when you really realized, what was the truth of everything, and that you are a lovable and likable person and people do like you. But here at a very young age, this is a cycle that you get caught in, or at least from my perspective sitting here, is a cycle you get caught in and obviously you're so young, you don't even know that this is even occurring.
No, that's the problem.
So I guess with this enmeshment that happens, I guess discuss this enmeshment and how you're acting and, what your role is in that at this age.
Yeah, sure. So really, you're absolutely right. I thought that myself, that because I struggled socially at school, that I was further entrenched in the kind of the tyranny of what was going on at home. But more importantly for me, it was like the template that was being built about who I am, like this sort of outline being coloured in by all these people and this abuse that I'm going through. And also coupled with the fact that nobody's intervening. Why the family don't say anything? We don't sort of see a lot of people. So there's no one sort of seeing what's going on. So there's a lot of isolation, and I have still, but not so bad, like this deep fundamental sense of loneliness that is really hard to describe. It's so alone when you're that little, all you've got is the bounds of your existence are these three people who are giving you evidence of who you are all the time. You see yourself reflected back in the face of your dad, who has a disgusted look on his face while he's raging at you. You see your mum not really intervening and sometimes sort of being pretty cruel and thinking it's funny. She prided herself on her sarcasm. She felt superior to people if she could pull them down and make everyone else laugh. And I was often the butt of that. She even had a term for it for me called Heidi baiting. So that was just something that she sort of took pleasure in, really, like humiliating a child and them crying and then sort of expecting everyone to laugh at it. And that's how I experienced my mum sometimes, and then bringing in my sister as well, enmeshed also, but more popular at school, more able to kind of integrate with other kids. So she's there, she's under the radar a lot, but she does join in with the cruelty. It's weird with her. It's like I'm superfluous at best and someone to sort of jeer at worst, really. And I could never really properly understand her even into adult life because, she's very distant from me, doesn't really want me to know the intimate details of her life or, what she's going through or whatever. I'm a very entertaining presence for her children. When the shit hit the fan later and I was going no contact and everything was falling apart, she was like, "Oh, there's a really big hole in the family. I saw you on a video doing the robot behind the kids and I missed it and I missed my family." And it's like, so I'm kind of there as someone as an entertainment, but that's the slot I'm allowed in this family where I can't talk about the fact that I feel so invalidated. And if I do, it's like, shut it down, snuff it out, however we can do it. My lack of containment and need to, connect with my own family was seen as something that needed to be squished. So yeah, definitely the enmeshment really was amplified, maybe compared to other kids. I don't know, but it just put a wall up above my development. I didn't get too far in terms of, how to handle social situations. So I took that into school with me. So I remember being quite bossy and controlling myself, dominant, and talked about myself a lot because if you don't have any other input of like what friends are doing or other people are doing, and you're so like locked into your lonely little world, you haven't got anything else to talk about. So looking back, I kind of crashed into situations where other kids were playing, didn't read the room, and they were baffling to me. I do remember being on the edge of a playground, in the new primary school, because we moved about a lot. I went to 6 different schools in 4 different towns. So you carry that body language, lowered eye contact, sort of almost sort of closing in on yourself with your shoulders and your hunch and and smalling yourself so you don't draw attention, and turning up at a new school, you can't sort of bounce in there and understand it all really and make new connections. So that certainly until like I reached post 16 education anyway. So I was hard to take, for other kids. And I didn't really know why. I just kept getting rejected. You don't when you're at primary school and into like junior school and middle school, you're just still developing, aren't you? But yeah, that enmeshment really keeps you back. I think that's why the loneliness is so fundamental, because the experiences at school as well. But gradually as I've gone on, and particularly when I got into a school where it was a grammar school, all girls grammar school, and for the first time there wasn't that kind of bitchy competition for boys. And I felt more comfortable for the first time. Like there have been moments in groups going forward from this where I feel more safe and I can just start to be myself, or be the kind of better self I knew was in there somewhere. So I got to sixth form, which is the 16 to 18 education in the UK, and like all girls school. And people were reacting to me very differently. There's a lot. I was very working class. These kids, a lot of them were middle class, but they accepted me. Some didn't. There was still bitchiness and stuff, but there was a definite sort of sense of, I could see in people's faces a different reflection of me than I could see at home. So this started on a sort of track, which became sort of gradual awareness of who I really was, but it just gets engulfed by the wave of who I've sort of been molded to be, unfortunately, for a long time, and eventually I do emerge from that.
So you're getting glimpses of who they are in one way, but you're also being molded into something else, which is part of this intergenerational trauma. So can you tell us more about this and, this being passed along by your dad and all of your feelings surrounding this?
He's learned some of what goes on for him. I think, for him, his development got arrested at a young age, and he is a very insecure man. He's like, I've revealed him like he's the skinny man in the Wizard of Oz now. I've opened up the curtain, and he was, I think, a more vulnerable man with narcissistic traits. And just, I think the strength of his insecurity, his self-hatred, his self-disgust, it was so strong that that's sort of represented in the strength of how much I hated myself, and it feels, looking back now as the pieces are coming together, is that he's got a lot of shame in himself and he can't handle it. It causes him too much anxiety. So he is literally slicing that off and giving it to me. And then when you're young and your whole family have this reality and they have an idea of who you are, you take that on. There's no other reality, especially in such an enmeshed family. So this is, I think, where I learned to be controlling and bullying not bullying, but because I didn't have enough friends to bully, I didn't have a gang, but, just sort of just not understanding that, being controlling in a game or bossy is not going to win you friends, because I just brought it with me. This is who I am, So the messages I got is that I'm not lovable, I'm a piece of shit, I'm worthless, nothing I say matters, none of my emotions or feelings matter. The response I'm getting at best is a kind of pat on the head and humouring me, and at worst, absolute terror, and a lot of that time was simply bleak, for me. And then other times were just awful, just silly rages about stuff. And because you don't have any ballast outside of that, you're just really stuck in it. It's like being in a prison. I'm in a maze I couldn't get out of, it's just relentless, grinding, chronic fear and misery, really, as a kid. But of course, because I was chatty and friendly as well, there was still that in me. You can't completely snuff out a person, So I'd leak out and that would upset him as well. So, for example, we were close to my cousins on my mum's side and we were always together for like holidays and school holidays and stuff. And I'd be playing and I had such a loud voice compared to the others. And I was just so excited to have some fun in my life, And you just hear him thumping up the stairs. I knew he was coming. Everything stops in the room. There's like this sort of every kid, and he makes a beeline for me. It's like a charging 6'1" man with massive hands. He's a very big guy as well. I'm this skinny little quivering wreck, But at this point, I'm playing and me enjoying myself is grounds for humiliating me in front of my cousins. So it's a phrase that he used to use is always you. And he used to put this straight pointed finger right in my face. And he'd have these eyes that would just bore into you. At the same time, you could just see they're saturated in hate and disgust and and contempt for me, which I later realised is his own shit that he's put into me. And there's this just crackle of energy, thick in the air, of anger, of heat. It's soupy. It's just tangible. And he has this sort of shimmer across his eyes, like a looking through a mirage, that heat haze. And that's his rage look at me. And I've been laughing and playing. And perhaps one of the worst things to do was lumping about, when you're a kid upstairs and you're sort of falling around and mucking about. But it was always me. And I'm like, what's always me? What is it that is so heinous it's like this monstrous, unnameable thing in me that makes me deserve that treatment. You know, no little girl deserves that, you know, even if they're a pain in the ass. It's just like, we don't do it with my nieces, my sister's kids, you know, we shower them with love. But this man, it's just, I was too triggering for him as myself. So he had to like snuff it out. So I'd be in tears, you know, I'd end up like, game's over, you know, just a wreck somewhere. No one comes to comfort you. Like, and you just have to like soothe yourself really. And you've just been humiliated in a room full of people. No one's intervened. That kind of backs up this whole repetitive story of your shit. You deserve this, you know. And so you carry that around with you, don't you? You know, all your life, really, if you don't work it out. And the problem is, really gets my goat, is it's so senseless and unnecessary in my family for us to have put up with that. If families talked about it instead of shrinking into little pieces of a chessboard to please this man, you know, we could have got him some help. When things have transpired later and things have got confronted, you know, it shut me down, don't want to talk about it, you know, and if we just, I could understand, you know, you guys have managed to put together some way of surviving this, because we all went through it, you know. Even him, he's gone through so much himself, and that's why he's like it. But, you know, they've had their ways of minimizing, denying, mental gymnastics to make themselves feel okay, you know, looking upon me as someone who, if only you did what we say, we'd be all right, you know, nothing to do with me, whether I'd be all right, you know, that's how it feels now. So they kind of chucked me under the bus to save themselves. And I think it was only about 4 or 5 years ago I discovered the concept of the scapegoat. Hadn't heard anything about, you know, narcissism gets chucked around, but it's very late in the day. I thought, oh yeah, that could be the case, you know. But definitely the start of it, in this phase of understanding things, was, you know, the scapegoat idea.
So, you know, you're dealing with all of this when you all the way up here until the age of 18. Mm-hmm. And we've mentioned your sister earlier. And for you, your sister at a certain point is getting treatment by your dad because she is a tomboy. Mm-hmm. But eventually your sister goes through puberty and doesn't get treated like she was once before, a tiny bit. So how does your relationship with her change? And I guess, what is your, your sibling dynamic will be iffy your whole entire life. But there could be moments where your sister might be your ally, you know, and that becomes its own minefield of trust, of what to trust and not to trust. So talk to us about like this relationship.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've never fully trusted her. Definitely not. You know, I couldn't trust her relationship with me. It morphs and changes. But I was the older kid, so I did like bully her as an older sibling, as a lot of kids do. You know, well, not bully her, I was just control her a little bit and stuff, and, you know, be a bit sneaky about getting her to do more chores than me. You know, simple things like that. So, you know, I don't blame her for wanting space from me, you know. I'm not perfect, things have happened. But she definitely was withdrawn. That was how she coped with things, you know, and that meant withdrawing from me. And, you know, she'd play with me sometimes as we sort of passed around each other at home as we're getting older. But, you know, generally she'd sort of join in a game for a little bit, then go off on her own, you know. So she was sort of hiding from it, you know, although she had a favourable relationship with my dad, because I think she learnt to contain her emotions and distance herself and dissociate, which I think my mum must have done as well to a certain extent. She developed sort of strategy of flying under the radar. She used to play with him quite a lot, and then, like you said, she hit puberty, and she told me in adult life, you know, when we have been allies in sort of small amounts, sort of talking through our family life, although it's all denied by her now, She opened up to me to say that when she hit puberty, Dad's sort of relationship with her, he just completely withdrew. And I've known that for years. She told me that quite a long time ago, and she attributes that to her need to always be in a relationship with a guy. Her safety is proximity to a guy, whereas mine is not transpired that way. I haven't really had a proper relationship. So what it kind of did with my sister is that sudden withdrawal has made her very needy for a guy to be in her life, and she's quite happy to forego her own needs for, what the guy wants, as my mum did, and sort of her recent kind of withdrawal, or our kind of rift at the moment, she's recently got married, and again, I think she's got what she needs, and I give her so little in terms of benefit for her relationship wise that it's easier for her to walk away from me, or for me to walk away from her, is what's happened. But it's easier for her to let me go, really, because she just has to be in proximity to a man like that for her to function. Whereas I used to look at that and think, oh my God, why can't I? I mean, literally, I can't get close to people very well. I was getting a lot better, but, lots of promiscuity, never amounting to much, for me. And I used to be really envious of her, thinking, God, she's so like cool, calm, rational. She could endure a lot of stress. She just stoical, pile it on. All the positive qualities I think my dad wanted to emulate went into her, or what parts of him that were there, his good parts. So, she'd float around, and she'd always have a boyfriend, and they'd have a very kind of, on the surface, normal relationship, moving together and stuff, but she very much was sort of a domestic slave, really, for her first big one. And so I was very envious of her, and now I look at it and think, well, she's successful in relationships with men because she molds herself to the will of a very dominant man, and I've never been able. There was one good thing: I won't take that kind of dynamic. I can't. Any kind of eruptions or violence or anything just triggers me, or anger, so I've walled myself away from that, really.
So, we've discussed that there is eventually a moment where you start to open your eyes. But before that, from the moment where you are now a, let's say, 20-year-old until that point, what is your life like? What is your life like with your family? And what is your life like, I guess, kind of like work-wise and socially, from your 20s to your 30s and into your 40s?
Okay, I'm going to shunt down to sort of 18 to start with, rather than go up to 20. But yeah, my life really was, so we moved when I was 7 from one town to another town. Then we moved to, I was 12. Then we moved again when I was 15. And it wasn't until the sort of last place I went to school, grammar school for girls, that, things started to feel better. I went to a really, really rough school in a small town in Suffolk. Like, it was an eye opener, really. I came from like this sort of countrified middle school where you're like 9 to 11, I think, something like that, into this giant comprehensive high school. This is sort of part of this transition where I'm kind of, there's another kind of world emerging, but I'm still existing in this family life of just a heavy atmosphere. It's horrible at home, and if I'm having fun, I'm shut down on eggshells. I'm trying to walk quietly on these eggshells. They're too noisy, it's like I just need to watch his every move. Like, that's one thing. When I'm around the space, I need to know where he is in the space. I need to read what is happening with him. Is he settled down? Is he asleep with the cricket on or something? That's good. That's good territory. Oh, he's waking up, like he's going to be in a mood. Just constant vigilance and assessment of that dynamic, so I could rarely get away from his influence in the house, even if you were upstairs out of his orbit at any moment, you could be called upon and you had to like run to attention like a soldier. Like if he came home from the supermarket with all the shopping, like he would just growl at you if you weren't there quick enough to help him. He's serving up dinner, you got to come down before he served it up, watch him serve it up. Like you're sort of in some way he wants help, but really he needs you there instantly because he says so. I mean, it's just lots of things were definite transgressions, like water on the bathroom floor or not changing a toilet roll. But there were other things within that were fluid, that would one morning even be just overlooked. And, later on in the day, it would be, like violent temper for the same thing that you did earlier, So how are you supposed to live like that? The rules are constantly changing. There's some bedrock rules that you should never pluck up, frankly, and in order to manage all that as a kid, you've just got to be on high alert all the time. So it's more, it's manifested in a very kind of, my revs are too high. I'm very kind of, my nervous system is a lot more reactive than maybe other people's. I find stability quite difficult, and it's all because of, I think, temperament as well, but I was just such a tense, nervous wreck looking for signals of violence. And because I was tense, it made me do things that would bring more violence on me, like emotional violence a lot of the time. But like, because I was so tense and shaky, I would spill. And if you spill, you're in a massive amount of trouble. And it goes so far as things like sometimes he would tell you what to bring to clean it up. Other times he'd just sit there and not say a word and you'd scurry off to get the things to clean up. Other times he'd march you into the kitchen to get you things that you need to clean up. And it always changed. So you could never get it right. You'd have to have your best guess at what would get you less of a telling off, a horrible telling off, those eyes, that kind of thing. It's not like you just sort of, there was never any tuition. It was always like done with anger, and I lived in that. So that's sort of the picture. There were happier times, like I said before, if all his little needs were met in every kind of sphere, he might be in a better mood. And then, he would be generous, or, he might be nice. And those moments were few and far between. And I loved them. I just wanted a dad that would protect me. And I loved it when he was happy. I just wanted him to be happy. Another example of sort of the bind I was in is that we were kids. I must have been about 13. And it's like, there's a wasp nest in the back garden. And he's got some family around, my uncle and like one of his few friends, and they're sorting this wasp nest out, and I think they're smoking it out or something. And like my dad stood there back to me, I'm sort of somewhere behind him watching on. It's a Saturday, I'm happy he's busy, I could at least relax for a bit. And he realised the wasp behind him, and he turns around and then has a massive go at me because apparently I saw the wasp there and didn't warn him because I wanted it to sting him. He just attributed so many thoughts, values, ethics, like negative traits to me, of things that don't even go on in my mind. Now I know who I am, but there was just this painting of me as just wishing him harm and like manipulating, all the things like cruelty that he would do to me. It's like I'm in opposite land, I've realised later. So that's really what home life was like for me. And school was frightening. There was a girl that once I moved to this massive comprehensive school, took it upon herself to bully me. And I talked to my mum about it, and she said, like, just pretend it doesn't bother you. Just pretend it doesn't bother you, and they'll stop it. They'll stop doing it. But it wasn't that simple. So this is really embarrassing. But there was this girl that used to like, I've got quite a large forehead. And this girl told me I had a large forehead, and she used to get the palm of her hand to just slap me in the middle of the head in lessons and say, slap head, and make everyone laugh. And like, because my mum had said, just ignore it, because they'll stop. I just used to let her do it and not react. And it's like, thanks, mum. This is the extent of your care. No one's coming up to sort of help at school, although you didn't want to really, because otherwise, it'd be worse. But, I was getting it on all fronts. I was scared everywhere, and I almost brought it on through my way I carried myself, my inability, my awkwardness. At that point in school, I was no longer the bossy boots I was as a kid. I was just like trying to get through the day, without putting my head above the parapet, really. And I got in with some really dodgy people and, started my journey into drugs and alcohol and stuff. So, that was early on. It was very rough. But then we happened to move to a complete opposite of this girls' grammar school, like I told you. And there it was less scary. So I've always found, in terms of friendships and stuff, that if I'm in a situation where I start to feel comfortable, I can interact with other people and predominantly make them laugh is what I do, as a way to kind of join in. But I might get closer to one or two of the group. It's like a situation. So, for example, the situation of the sixth form common room where we all used to hang out when we weren't in lessons, I'd make friends in that, but nothing too close, very superficial mucking around. But I couldn't instigate drawing someone into my orbit outside that situation. It's been like that in work situations. Eventually, when I got comfortable in my first ever work situation, the late 30s, it's always been like, I can't make a friend because who would want to come and spend time with me? Who would want to love me? Who would even like me? That's the fundamental feeling I had, which kept me isolated as well. So there's always been so as I went into my 20s, so I get to 18, somehow I've got good grades because I was naughty in sixth form and mucked around. And so I went off to university, and for the first term, I was still suffering from the same anxieties. Couldn't get a place in the first year, halls of residence. I couldn't make friends my own age in the environment I was in. I was in a shared house with people in their final year, but they did adopt me and get me out. And, I thought I wouldn't go back after Christmas. I hadn't met all my gang of people that I eventually hung around with. And then I started to make friends. We started taking drugs, recreational drugs, ecstasy, LSD, speed, and going out to all-night raves in this massive cathedral that was no longer a cathedral in a city in England. And it was just amazing to finally be with a group of people that had one purpose, which was to love each other and go and dance, But unfortunately, because of the drugs, it wasn't long before people start getting sketchy. There's elements of anxiety on come downs, there's depression, especially if you take a lot of MDMA, it really does affect you. It's a weird loss of self, that is, if you overdo it, and we did, but they were the people who showed me that I was nice and all right and someone to be around. And they were all middle class, and I was this working class kid that never thought I'd get out of town. And here I am with people that want to be friends with me. Again, I found it very difficult to instigate one-on-one time, but I had a lot of gangs of people. We used to sort of move around different houses, getting stoned, going to raves, and I finally really felt that I was likable to some people. However, this old mindset, what you've grown up with, is really hard to shift, and there's not enough evidence for me yet that I'm all right. So it's kind of weird because I don't start really realizing I'm all right until I'm far, far away from home, really, or, the sort of late teens, individuation from your parents. I'm finally out of that enmeshment for bigger periods of time, and I can actually see reality. But of course, I'm carrying all that shit with me, and it's sort of hard to kind of change that. But I notice looking back several little incidents which made me realise that I was carrying his attitudes and his ways and that controlling thing I had as a kid with me into adult life. So I couldn't understand why people wouldn't change a toilet roll. And that came from my dad, and I steamed in the kitchen one day and said, come on, we're supposed to, and they're like, why does it matter? And I remember thinking, it doesn't actually, I don't care. But I'd taken that whole thing with me I thought, God, I'll drop that, and there was another time that I come out of the bath, like, who's used my shampoo? And like, this girl said, how do you know someone's used it? And I'm like, well, I don't use it and it's gone down. And she said, well, if you don't use it, why are you bothered? And I'm like, I'm not. So there's all these weird sort of patterns of behavior that I brought into adult life with me. And the difference between me and my dad is, I had some of his crap with me. I behaved in ways that they said I did, but actually it didn't really matter to me, who I am. I was like, oh, yeah, there's another time a few years later, but still in university, I was like, someone had done a prank and I went, oh, that's crap or something. And my friend turned to me and said, oh, Heidi, everything's boring, everything's crap. And I remember thinking, I said, God, yeah, it is, isn't it? And like just these negative ways of seeing the world and sort of rules, weird little rules, that I'd carried with me. But I realised it's not who I am. I brought it with me. And there, as soon as I'm away from that sphere of influence and I'm seeing evidence to the contrary, I'm starting to get a better picture of who I am, Yeah, so I'm really starting to get ideas of who I am from the faces and the actions of other people in my life, and I'm enjoying them. I love my friends, and there are moments of camaraderie, probably drug-induced, when I'm comfortable and enjoying my mates and don't want to leave their company. But I remember still, there'd be big groups of people taking drugs the next day after a club, and I did not want to wander off on my own and be by myself. I found it really hard to be alone. When I was in a shared house with a few girls, I couldn't be the last one to go to bed. I couldn't be the person that went to turn all the light switches off and make the house dark behind me. I had this sort of ominous horror film type sense of like, flashes if there'll be someone with an axe or, really horrible imagery that would frighten me. So I'd start to see everyone rustling, getting ready for bed and stuff, and I'd be first up, and that's again the kind of vigilance and fear that I brought with me, where I'd be watching other people so that my safety and comfort wasn't, trashed. I had to be the first to bed because I couldn't lock up, and and so I hated being on my own. I was always in the company of other people. I just felt like on my own. I suppose it just come to me now, really. I suppose because I was seeing who I really was and nicer qualities in me in other people. When I would leave that, I'd just get this sort of despair and a kind of desolation. It was almost like I didn't really exist without being in the company of people who were showing that they liked me. And I was, more importantly, interacting with them comfortably and building, beginnings of relationships and things. So that was really strange, really, that was all coming out. But at the same time, it's powerful. I'm only early 20s. I'm still very close to, being in time, being in that kind of prison with my family. And I would still go back to them in the holidays. I'd nowhere else to go and I'd have to get a job. And I remember one time I went back to live with them after I'd left uni as well, just for a little bit before I moved to another town. And I was still visiting friends up at uni. And I phoned him up Sunday night because I'm off my phone. And I said, I'm not coming back till Monday. I'm going to phone in sick from work. He went mental about it. And the other end of the phone, he's like, you get back here now or I'm going to chuck you out. It's really abusive, horrible about it, because I wasn't doing the right things going to work. I was transgressing his values and ethics of what you do as a good person. And he was still trying to control me. I just said, I'm an adult. I'll do what I want. And hung up on him. And then by the time I got home, my mum had sort of placated him and stuff. But, I was up against it still at home. So although I was going off to uni, and it would be such a relief getting there again in the September term after the summer holidays, I'd be like, oh, thank God. It was so bleak where I was with my parents for me. hardly anything said, just dull drudgery. In fact, there was a time, I thought about this the other day, where it sort of demonstrates the fact that I wasn't allowed to have any joy or fun because it upset him. I was home from university and it was sort of 95 probably. So we all had these crappy mobile phones that you got in the first instance, the ones you used to play Snake on. I think the Nokias. Maybe that was a bit later, but anyway, that's beside the point. So someone's texting me because we used to keep in contact in the holidays. Some of my friends and I, for the first time in ages, we'd ring each other up. I had friends that rang me up, but I'd sometimes dread the phone ringing because I wouldn't be able to speak because I'm so nervous about who I am, particularly with a couple of friends who I really liked but felt were so much better than me. But they kept stuck around and kept at it. And I've got one today that I'm still friends with. But so I'm texting and my dad's like told me off. And I'm like, oh, it must be because of the bings. It's annoying him. So I turn the volume off or the ring off. And then he's basically like, stop texting. So not like that the noise is ringing him up, is winding him up. It is the very fact that I'm connecting with other people in his orbit. I wasn't able to text again that night with the sound down in front of him. It's just astonishing, it's like stopping me from enjoying other people. That's the theme, really. Enjoying life, being able to express joy, because that would just trigger rage in him and stuff. So it's just horrible. It was really hard. So I moved to the town where my sister was with her fella, and they lived together in a basement flat. It's a really cool town. It's sort of south of London on the coast. And my sister lived there with this guy, and I moved to this new place with this person that I was living with, friends with at university, this girl, but our relationship was already falling apart by the time we got to Brighton because I had to look after her basically, and it was so draining. I had to take care of the bills, take care of the bleeding, and it was just too much. We fell out in the end, but she was all I had really, and I didn't want to hang out with her. She kept inviting homeless people back and big issue sellers, just because she was like lovely and wanted to help people. And I'm like, oh, this is my house. I can't take all this drinking and strangers in here. I was very sensitive to all that, really, very insecure feeling, So I would run to my sister's. I wanted to go there every day because I just felt so lonely and didn't have anyone else but this girl. And I ended up going every other day, I think, because it was a bit overwhelming for my sister. And I'd get there, but I'd feel this sense of humouring me, of looking down on the poor girl who is just this, wreck of a person, a car crash. That's how I felt she viewed me, and all these other negative things that I've been sort of infected with from the family dynamic. I'm like the appendix of the family where all the toxins go, and I'm still in her image, in her eyes like that, but it's not I'm not constantly aware of horribleness and cruelty, but there can be some sort of sly snidiness that brings me down, or a cutting joke that's really horrible that you're supposed to kind of suck up. But for the most part, they both smoked a lot of weed, and I just sort of sat watching telly with them. And I was working in this insurance company, and it was just really dull, but going out and partying with workmates. So I started to make friends in work, but this workplace, there's a lot of young people, but I was very nervous and awkward around them. But I eventually sort of got a little gang, and I started to relax again. Again, I can't really instigate friendships outside of this circle because I don't feel worthy enough for anyone to make friends with me. And people started really trying. And there was this guy who I think was attracted to me that used to really make an effort to make friendship with me, and it was very touching. But I forgot about this, because my mum said to me growing up, anyone that fancies you isn't worth having. That was her line. She's a joke. I actually almost lived that anyone that liked me I didn't want, because obviously if they like me they must be rubbish, it's such horrible messages. So I couldn't really fall in love with anyone that wanted to be with me. I just didn't have access to what that was. And I remember thinking, well, I thought quite a lot that I have this kind of space or gap between me and other people that I can't bridge, much less now, but this is sort of in my 20s, where I can't invite anyone over and I can't go towards. It's like there's this sort of the part of the circuit board of making relationships is missing, and I don't get it. I've seen even as late as my PhD, so 2019, I saw people forming friendships in my cohort, and I'm like, how does that happen? Like, I'm quite baffled by it. Unless I really hit it off with someone straight away, I find it very hard to build friendships. Unless it's completely obvious that a guy likes me, I can't read it. It's really hard. So I'm in this sort of period in my 20s. I'm like a car crash. I'm lurching from one situation that goes wrong to another. And most of that is around relationships with guys and housing. It's expensive city I was trying to live in. Shared houses would break down, and I'd be taking a lot of drugs and drinking, and all you sort of live for were your weekends. And, I just wasn't able to function very well. And in jobs, this job in the insurance company, I had loads of time off sick because I just wasn't looking after myself. I started to get depression and anxiety sort of early 20s and started to get medicated for it. And so I'd be going along for about 6 months and then I'd just sink into depression. And that was awful, really, really bad. Just, I don't know, I was lost, just completely lost. There was no moorings to anchor to, because I'm getting a bigger and bigger sense that my family are not really the best place for me, but still getting into practically difficult situations where they have to help me out. I'd have to ask for help. And that would again trigger rages. Like if I ask for help, even if it's money, I need help with money. You've got it. Can you help me? It would be, I'd be completely ripped to shreds about the core of my being, and the fact that I'm not doing what I should be doing to survive. And that now I'm asking them, and, they would eventually help me, but I'd pay for it first. Like, or sometimes about twice, I think I ended up having to go back and stay there for a few months. And it was just, again, bleak and heavy and depressing. And, so even though I sort of progressed out of their orbit, because of not being able to team up with a partner in life, because I had the kind of circuit board for intimacy and friendships like missing, it was really hard to keep myself afloat, keep myself housed, especially with the depression, anxiety pulling me out of jobs or being overwhelmed, by the work I was trying to do. So it's very hard to keep my head afloat. So I had to ask for help, and you're not allowed to ask for help, clearly, because you deserve a verbal beating for it. And he seemed to delight in that power, really, that power imbalance, and giving him an opportunity to be an arsehole, basically.
So eventually you started getting different jobs and more opportunities. So tell us about this.
I start to do jobs which are more involved, like working in a sort of marketing department in a school. And, I was good at things. People would say I was good at things, I'd be competent and actually quite creative and brainy and, but unfortunately I can have all that, have the skills for these jobs, but because I haven't got the emotional stability, the sense of identity that I'm comfortable with, because I've got, these horrible messages swirling around in my head, not just my head, but every fibre of my being, it's just you who you are still, although there's sort of so much cognitive dissonance now, like I'm just getting all these messages that I'm not this, but it's still battling with it, it's really hard. So I'm getting opportunities now and I'm getting recognised. I'm like, I could actually do something that would earn me more than minimum wage, and I could stop having to worry about being on the edge of homelessness all the time. That's how it felt, just catastrophic. But I just was finding that emotionally I couldn't handle it.
And eventually you do end up going and start traveling the world to kind of get this freeing feeling while you're away from everything, and you start meeting friends. But like other times in your life, you have a hard time staying close to these friends once you come back, and eventually you fall into a depression, and there's a lot of suicidal ideation that is going on, and you're getting treated for that. And also, when you came back to England at this time, you did end up getting a job, and you liked the people that you worked with. And then things started to get really expensive where you were living because of the cost of living. So what happens from here?
So that was an amazing workplace. But I got towards the end of 2012. It was the autumn 2012. And I realised that I couldn't afford to live in this town anymore. And I'd been living in a shared house with these two guys. And when I first arrived there, one of them was a composer, the other one brewed at a brewery. And they were really cool. Again, why would they like me? The whole sorry scenario, and I got very anxious. They were cooler than me in inverted commas, and I just couldn't talk to them. It's automatic; it sort of shuts down, and I can't bridge that gap. It's so hard. I can't control that close down in a way and that distance. And the only place I can go to when I'm like that, when you have anxiety that bad, you can't put yourself anywhere. You don't know where to put yourself. Everywhere you try and sit, everywhere you try and stand, whatever you try and do, you're just so uncomfortable. There's no safety anywhere except that enmeshed, ridiculous family, because I believe they had unconditional love for me, because that's what families do. But obviously I was very primed to, I was in a situation where that wasn't the case. It was very much conditional love. But, you go back to your family that's all I had. I didn't have anyone very much at all, especially once I left Brighton. But I couldn't stay there because I was so anxious. And so I got the train back. I told work I was going to have a couple of weeks off. I think I was planning to go back to my parents' house, go on antidepressants, wait for them to kick in, and then go back to work. It's like I don't have time to get off the economic treadmill. Like the margins are so slim in my world that I can't lose this job. It's a shit contract. They all are. And so I've got to keep going. So the only course of action I think I can do, the only people that I won't feel completely uncomfortable with are my family. So I go back to my mum and dad's. And this is quite horrible to talk about, really. And it's a horrible story, but what it did is it set me on a course for taking some responsibility for the enmeshment that I was still playing a role in, and making plans to extricate myself from it. So I've gone home to my parents' house, and this is the first time I've spoken really openly about it, and it's caused me a lot of angst, but it's something I think is important to shine a light on for me, and also for other people to know that you don't have to be ashamed. You can move through and past something like this. So I'm at home now. Even I call it home. It wasn't a home, right? But I didn't have another home. I was only just moved into that other place. I didn't really have any safety, so I go back there. And as a family, we always drank with each other, and this is no different. And don't know where my mum is. This point in time is very sort of hanging there in space and time. I don't know what we were doing before these events happened, and I completely forget it after. So my mum's somewhere. She usually sort of drunk early and then had a snooze somewhere. And there's me and my dad talking, and I'm talking to him about this house and the anxiety and how I feel. And we'd started getting closer the year or so before. I spent a bit more time with him, and he seemed to be softening towards me. And I'm like, this is older age, brilliant, And he had this scooter, and he gave it to me because he wanted to buy a better one. And we went scooting to the pub together, had a few good times, And so I'm talking to him, thinking, this is, it's comforting to tell my dad my vulnerabilities and have him be sympathetic. And he was, sometimes he wore his heart on his sleeve. And so I'm telling him my most vulnerable stuff. And he gets up from the other side of the dining table. So we're diagonally opposite each other. He's by the window. I'm into the room. He gets up. He comes around the dining table and he's by my right shoulder. I'm still sat down, and he puts his arm around my shoulders and he starts kissing my face. And I'm like, instantly, this does not feel right. He never hugs me as a dad. You know, we give a little pet goodbye. You know, that's it really. And so he sort of plants a kiss on my cheek, sort of like lips on my cheek, and then the end there's a tongue, and then there's one I think on my neck, and then there's one, and I'm just like, is this what's this? What's this? You know, I'm completely frozen in what I now know is a trauma response, and I'm like, I cannot work out what is going on, and I can't do anything about it. So he does 3, 4, maybe 5 of these very slowly. I can feel there's a romantic vibe to it, but I'm frozen, and I'm still working it out, because the thing that you would least expect to happen to you in your life in the next moment is what transpires. You know, it's like, it's off the chart, mind blowing. You know, it's just, that's why it's so traumatic. Anyway, so my hands are like in my lap, I think. And he gently like clasps my wrists and then holds them together. And then he's lifting them up as he's sort of standing up, forcing me to stand up with him. And then he puts my arms around the back of his neck. And I'm looking up at him. And this now is not feeling good. This is not this. I'm starting to realize through the freeze time, there's evidence building up that I need to snap out this and move away. You know, it's all happening so slowly in my mind. But so I'm there, and then I don't know if he presses against my boobs, but he presses against my crotch waistband area, and he is aroused, and that's my dad. And I'm like, oh my God. I instantly snap out of it. I jump back. I sort of sit down, and I remember looking at him with this sort of hurt confusion came across my face. I'm like, what? And he just turned around, wobbled off, went into the sitting room and sat on the sofa. And I'm left with that. I'm like staring into space, still all the adrenaline and all that fight and flight coursing through me. And I'm like, he's drunk. He has no idea what he's just done. He's blackout drunk. That's what it is. That's all it can be. I couldn't entertain the idea that he felt like that, you know. And then I forgot it. I'm not kidding. I didn't remember it at all until he did it again 9 months later. And the 9 months later, maybe a year later, one was like, he went to kiss me again in a certain way. I'm like, what the fuck are you doing? And he pulled back instantly. He trotted along the grass because we were outside in the garden summer evening, and he was going, sorry, sorry, sorry. And he looked so pathetic, this big 6'2", giant of a man who's had such power and control and fear-mongering dictatorship in my life. He's hunched over, scurrying away, saying sorry. Now, you can't do that to a person and then say sorry. It is meaningless, you know? And I was sat there, and then suddenly this tsunami of the previous event just washed in, and I fought back, he's gone, and then I'm just left with that, and I couldn't forget it then. And the weird part of it is between the two incidents, I couldn't remember it. I'm still thinking, I'm getting close to my dad, so I'm going to the pub on my own with him. You know, he wants to go and see a gig in London, and I live on a boat by this point the second time near London. And I said, yeah, come and stay at mine. I think back to that. I'm like, how did I not know? How did I complete amnesia? And it demonstrates that I still felt safe-ish with him in this new, you know, father-daughter relationship. As he was getting closer and being more fatherly, that I would spend time alone with him. You know, I was that amnesia about it all. And then it was just hell for a decade. Just so hard to describe. It is the dumbfoundedness of that course of events happening to you, you think about the moments before, you would never imagine that was the next thing to happen to you in your life. And it's your dad. You know, there's no penetration. He didn't force himself. He walked off drunk. He was drunk the first time, but the second time he wasn't as drunk because he's a bus driver and he had to get up for work the next day, and he wouldn't be, he could be over the limit. He could get breathalyzed, so he's careful. So I knew he wasn't as drunk. And I think that was part of the thing that crumbled the anxiety defense of forgetting it, is because it's like, oh, can't argue with that now, can you? And I just didn't know what to do with that. And I very quickly realised that I no longer can ask for help from those people. I can't go and live there if I become homeless again, because I'm still no boyfriend, no partner, unable to kind of look after myself properly because there's only one income. It's so expensive, yada, yada. So I know, right, I've got to take some responsibility. This is the words I'm using now. It wasn't necessarily how I thought of it at the time, for the enmeshment. So I realised I had to do something. I've got talents and skills and capabilities that I've been told I've got from other jobs. I need to think about how I'm going to get a professional job at the same time as drinking like a fish now. You know, I'd always drank too much. I'd always smoked a lot of marijuana, dissociating, escaping. But this went through the roof actually at that time. But at the same time, I'm working in a school for kids with behavioural difficulties because I'm thinking I'll either be a social worker or a teacher. So I set myself on a course of action gradually to get myself towards doing a master's degree. But in the meantime, I can't even really tell you what was going through my mind on a day-to-day basis for a long time, except that I'd be going about my business and then I'd be blindsided by a memory. I'd have nightmares nearly every night at the beginning. I still have one a month of, you know, him taking that further. And it's just disgusting and upsetting, and just it's not a way to have your dad portrayed in your mind, you know. And it's like, who is that person? You know, I knew he was horrible to me, I knew he was cruel, I knew he made me feel like shit, but I didn't know he was that kind of dad, you know. There are plenty of them. I didn't think he was one of them. I was a social worker, I've met them, you know. And it's just like, but I didn't want to tell anyone, and I didn't tell anyone to protect my mum and sister. And also because I didn't have anyone else really solid to rely on. Not that they were solid, but they were the most solid I had, you know. So I couldn't, you know, let a bomb off in my family. I was too mentally vulnerable. I needed them. Didn't want my sister and my mum to know what he was like even, you know. I didn't want them to see him like that. But I knew that, you know, and I had to still play a role in that family. So because I didn't want my mum and sister to know, and because I didn't have much of a social life, I used to go back there once a month. I continued to do that. A sister would bring the baby who was there at that time, and we'd, you know, do what we normally do. I knew what he'd done, and he knew what he'd done. Everyone else was oblivious, and I noticed he couldn't make eye contact with me hardly at all anymore. I could see the shame in his eyes. I would be in a room with my mum and my sister and the kid, and then I'd have to read it again. They're getting up to go. I'm reading it, and I'm like, I can't be in a room on my own with this man. I just can't feel. Not only is there that angry, crackly atmosphere going on, there's also, you know, that unsaid thing that he did to me. You know, I never say that happened or whatever. It's he did it to me. You know, just to give him the culpability. You know, so going back to that house, playing a role in that family. He knows what he's done. I know what I'm done. Incredibly uncomfortable, having nightmares about him assaulting me while I'm staying in his house, you know, waking up the next day knowing what's gone on in my brain. But I knew at that point he didn't have a leg to stand on. His rages were more general from that point on. There was a shift. I started to build a sense of power in myself in terms of my ability to look after myself as time went on. I was still drinking a lot, but I was really trying to build the experience to have a career that would mean I was more independent from that dynamic, and I started working on that. But I was trying to do this job, trying to change this career with this sludge in me. It wasn't always present, but you can't tell when that's going to hit you. I couldn't have a sexual relationship for 8 years, and that was from the age of 37. You did it the first time, 38, until, I was 45 or so. So that was a good 8 years where I just couldn't date. I couldn't think about it, couldn't. So, I have to live with that. And I have to live with sort of the deceit with my mum and sister, and push it all down and just try and get on with it. And I'm still seeing them every month and playing a role in that family. So just living with that all the time, just it's such a lot to deal with. It's so hard to keep going. But I did. It's weird actually when I think about it that I struggled more with careers before he did that than after. I set myself on a course and committed to a course of action to get myself to do a master's degree in social work, and I achieved that, and became a social worker, but again got too overwhelmed and couldn't do it. But like, it almost in a way freed me from that dynamic, because it set me on a course again to free myself from them. So so basically I was so pissed off with it all that I thought, I don't think I'm ever going to be able to move on from this just weight of shit I'm carrying without just confronting him with it. And I talked to my best mate and said I'd do it. And then, me being impulsive, one Saturday night, I write, and I don't even edit it. It's just, it pours out, fully formed narrative. It was just everything. I not accused him. I said to him what he did had really screwed me up, not just what he did to me in 2012 and 2013, my entire life, and listed examples. And, I remember in social work, learning about fucked up parents who attribute negative attributions to their children. So like that wasp story, he thought I was evil enough to want him to get stung by a wasp, and that I wasn't telling. I didn't care, I wasn't even focusing on that. But, it's all that sort of stuff was coming up. Like everything I'd learned up to that point, I just let him have it. And I just sent it. And at the end of it, I wrote, well, do you want to tell mum or shall I? I didn't know what I was doing. It's like I've had this grenade in my lap that he pulled the pin out of in 2013. And I've finally thrown it, because I couldn't hold it anymore. It's too hot or whatever. It's just, I know I laugh, but sometimes words and humour are the only way to get through things, So anyway, I texted my mum and said, do you know what's going on today? And she just writes, yes. I said, has he told you? She writes, yes. I said, well, what do you think? And she goes, well done, your dad's in bits. And I'm like, that encapsulate what you were talking earlier about the fact that I am, my existence is bare with them, like that my very existence set my dad off all the time. But that has happened. He's done that to me. It would blow anyone's mind. Even if, okay, so he's drunk. Even if he just told me that and not done those actions, it would flip your mind out, wouldn't it? My dad feels like that about me. It just goes against biology. It goes against evolution, social contravention, everything to be like how things should be, And I had PTSD from it. And she says, well done, your dad's in bits. And I wrote back, I said, I've got PTSD. Come on, And she's like, what did she say? I think she said, she acknowledged it, but I would want, if someone told me that had happened to them, I'd be like, oh my God, how are you? But unfortunately, because of her enmeshed relationship with dad, what we said might be codependent, I knew she wasn't going to leave him. It wasn't like I thought she'd go. I'd love it if everyone just turned around and went, "Oh my God, what an evil man," and then walked off with me. But obviously, we know this doesn't happen. The victim gets blamed eventually. But the funny thing is in 2014, I emailed him, like, because it was the first time I'd said about it, and I said it to a doctor, and I didn't say anything about it again until like 8 years after, where I told my friends, and then a year later, I outed my dad to the family, and like the doctor said, "Oh, did it happen to your sister? Why don't you talk to your sister?" I thought, I can't talk to my sister about this. It's only a year later. So I think, well, I want to know if anything happened. So I was drunk, living on the boat, like a little tiny area in a boat, just sitting drinking on my own after work, weekends. And I texted him, and I emailed him and said, "Did it happen to?" Nothing happened to her, but what exactly do you think happened to you? And that sent a chill up my spine, because I don't remember anything he did to me as a kid. I do think that, if he could hate me, it distanced himself from whatever goes on in his pants, and he didn't act on it, because of that. I don't know. But that point where he said, "It depends what you think happened to you," I thought, well, is there something else? Like, is he hedging his bets just in case? And I still can't remember anything. I have no idea. But I said, and I've been screwed ever since, And I said, "And twice." And he wrote back and said, "All I know is when very drunk, I kissed you. It was not acceptable behaviour, and it won't happen again." So I've got proof, and I apologise again. And it's like, well, that's apologising, unless it's like, how can I make this better? What can I do? Is meaningless as far as I'm concerned, because he didn't make anything better. But I did have it written down by him, an admission in my mind, So when I outed him, I also sent that. And so he doesn't even deny he did that in a way, right? But he admits to some of it, kissing me, and it wasn't appropriate. It wasn't acceptable behaviour. My mum and my sister know this, but it's basically this spectacular mental gymnastics that's gone on to minimise the situation, deny my reality as has always been, in order for them to feel comfortable with this heinous act against me. They've got to create stories in their mind which, again, in some way demonizes me. And I suppose that wasn't particularly evident in my mum's response, but it was very much like there was no care for me, so it sort of indicated in my mind that, that's where she was with it. But my sister reacted differently, and she's the thing was, I sent it in a voice note, and I think because she could hear my voice, she knew it was genuine, and that I was, visibly shaken up, audibly shaken up, and I described it as I've described it to you, and she couldn't argue with it, and she believed me, and she had the evidence where he'd admitted it, and so her first reaction was, "I don't know what to say. I want to support you, but my head's a mess right now." But it felt in some way supportive. Then it was not long after, it was my birthday, and it's also my niece's birthday 3 days before, and we're always together with mum and dad during that time. Now, planning to go up during that time to mum and dad's before, I've outed him, and she still goes, and I'm like, well, I'm over here just having said all this, and I'm a right mess, and if it was me, I'd go to you, instantly. I've always cared about her, and I've done my best to try and help her as we've grown into adults and stuff. Love her to bits, but just don't seem to get that back. But so she goes there, and I should have seen where this was going. So this is like 3 years ago. That what transpires later, this was the sort of early indication of it. Where she feels safe is in proximity to him and with my mum, because she always has done. So anything that goes wrong in our family dynamic of that proportion, she'll go there for safety rather than me, and I'm a mess and no one's helping me. In the end, I told my nan. The first thing she said, "What do you think that news is going to do to me?" And it's like, no one really is turning around and going, oh my God, you poor thing, you know, it's a big thing that's happened to me. And all my close family are just doing that, you know. I tell my cousins they're much more accepting because they saw a lot of what went on as visitors to the house in terms of his rages towards me, but they've got no idea what went on behind closed doors, you know, between visits, which was bleak, terrifying, or sometimes okay, you know. But yeah, so they're really supportive. My mum's sister, my auntie, is really supportive, but in a very pragmatic, won't talk. I'm not talking about it with her kind of way. Um, and then there's events leading up to, you know, end of May this year, where I finally have to cut contact with my sister. Well, I cut contact with both my parents. Well, this has all been going on. My sister split up with the father of her children, and she's got another guy very quickly. But she had been seeing him for 2 years, but hadn't told anyone, and so they move in together very quickly. I find it uncomfortable. I feel quite icky for the children. There's a lot more affection between them, and it's in front of the kids, and it's just a bit, I don't know, I felt very uncomfortable about it, but the kids seem fine. And then suddenly they're going to get married in March 2023 this year, and it's June 2022. At that point, I've been doing my PhD, I've been going to the gym a lot, I'd stopped drinking for a while, I was doing really well. And I've visited my sister on numerous occasions and spent time with the kids, and I've just not talked about it. About what happened. I'd kind of not moved on, but I'd got to a more level place where I was able to look after myself, and it wasn't so front and center of my mind. And my sister's going to get married, and she says to me, me and want to come up and visit you. We want to spend time with you without the kids. Well, that's nice, I thought, you know. So anyway, they come up and visit, and I think basically they didn't bring the kids with them because she was going to rip the band-aid off. She said to me, can we talk about the elephant in the room? I'm like, what? I said, there is no elephant. I said, you're the elephant. At that point, I'd sort of not really thought about it or talked about it that much with anyone, you know, let alone her. And, you know, she's basically trying to refute my hypothesis that the reason he pulled away from her when she hit puberty was because once she saw her developing into a woman, it stirred feelings in him he didn't like. And that he probably had feelings like that for me as a kid, but in order to distance himself and stop himself doing it, he meted out all his hatred on me instead. You know, there's a fine line between love and hate. It was a very kind of passionate intensity of anger towards me. Instead, he would be able to give himself permission to come in and grab me and interact with me in a very intense fashion, whatever he needed to do to offset some of his own anger and shame. I don't know, whatever it was. I just got this sense that this had been going on for him for a long time, and that my mum might have known about his feelings, and that's why she wasn't so shocked. I don't know. But my sister refutes that. And she has to, because she's got 2 teenage daughters or coming up to teenage years. And if he has those sorts of feelings, then they could be quite dangerous to them. So basically, people just want their lives to be undisrupted. They want the status quo. So they're going to adopt any kind of threads of narrative that they can amplify, and then any kind of threads of narrative they can sort of stamp out or minimize in order to enable themselves to live with something so hideous and carry on with their lives. That's how it seems. So, but by doing that, they're completely invalidating my experience, and they're completely invalidating who I actually am. They're refusing to listen to who I actually am. They won't hear me. And it feels as though it is because their sense of self, the way the world works, is so heavily predicated on their view of me as being inferior, of being the vessel for all the crap of the family, that, you know, they can't look at it. It's impossible for them to look at it. I'm as toxic to them as they are to me. They're as toxic to me as I am to them. Because they can't look at it, I can't have a relationship with them. And because I want them to look at it, they can't have a relationship with me, because looking at it shakes the whole house of cards that the whole system was built on. around to keep him in a good mood, essentially, you know? So this is where we've got to. Like, she came up in July, she ripped the Band-Aid off, and then the wedding was coming up in March. Initially, I was going to be maid of honour. I even started writing a little speech for it, and then I'm like, the penny started dropping. Oh shit, I'm going to have to see him. Now, I haven't seen him for 3 years, and the thought of it just brings on that terror again and disgust and such nasty, horrible feelings that I decided I couldn't go and didn't go. And it was sort of brushed under the carpet. I'd injured my finger, so they said I couldn't come.
So at this point, you've come to terms with you always being the scapegoat of your family. And, you know, with all these realizations, there's all these stresses and traumas that are going on from a lifetime of everything that you've dealt with. And you eventually had to quit your PhD and you moved into a converted van. But you also did go to the police to report your dad about what he had done. So walk us through what happens from here.
Yeah, so now we're moving really to the point where the floodgates open and I'm just tripping over epiphanies because basically I decide I need to go to the police about my dad. You know, so I report him to the police and my sister didn't think it was a crime and that she didn't know what the police were going to do. To be honest, she said, as they sort of rallied round to try and manipulate me out of doing it, my sister said that it's my failure to commit and find inner peace that's my problem, and that was going on long before what he did. And so literally the problem is located in you. You know, that's essentially what I got. And the vitriol and the viciousness and the lack of care and concern that was in her communications was astonishing, but not surprising. It was, again, a puzzle piece fitting that helped me to see she's the last of that triad of people that have been a damaging place for me to be. And I can't be around her now, to the point where I'd sacrifice my relationship with my nieces it's that dangerous for my mental health to be around that, you know. And like, it's amazing how no contact for me has just catapulted me into where I'm at now. Like it's a hard mindset to shift about yourself, but you know, we've talked about all the kind of signals from anyone else that's not my family that I'm an all right person, and I don't mean any harm. I'm empathetic. I love people. I love interacting with people. All the things that I couldn't express are all coming up. But also, obviously, it's a strong shadow world that keeps lapping up and grabbing me occasionally. But I notice it, and I can, you know, do a lot of work on like recognizing those parts of me being triggered and sort of looking at, you know, other ways to soothe myself and stuff. So the things that have really worked for me really have been meditation and mindfulness. I don't do it regularly. You know, it's like when you go running and you think, wow, I should do this all the time. You know, I do have phases of it when I've got more stability, and I'm gradually kind of increasing the amount of healthy activities that I do, you know, and living a very kind of simple life now. It's almost like an invisible hand stopped me, said, like, quit your PhD, go and sit in that field and think about it for a bit because you're not getting anywhere. You know, it's almost like being given this opportunity to suddenly work through it. And at first I did get quite manic and had to then go back to the psychiatrist and get put on some antipsychotic medication. Although I don't have psychosis, it helps me sleep and it balances me out more, because I was just, so many epiphanies are coming up. I'm recording myself, I'm writing, I can't sit down, I'm animated, you know, and whittering onto myself, and it was getting a bit much and I could see mania coming. But just so much has happened, so much that, you know, it's still very fresh. I think one of the pinnacles for me, noticing that I'm on the right track, is I went to see some friends down south for a walk. There were a few people there I didn't know. In the past, I'd have shied away from them. And there's one guy, and for the first time in my entire life, I managed to like hold his gaze for my entire point without looking away, because I felt safe and comfortable in myself. That's made me quite upset to think that, because it's such shame that,
someone has to go through all that. It's so senseless. It's so unnecessary. It's so it's so wasn't me that I was made to feel I was. And it's so sad, but I haven't had any choice but to figure it out, and now I can fulfill my potential. The way I look at it is the PhD was not suited to me, not the other way around. I know that in the right environment with the right stress levels and sort of some nurturing and love, I can do really well. It's just I've been really up against it. So there we have it. I'm not speaking to my family, but I can honestly say I've never felt better for longer periods. It's a slippery fish. Sometimes I can keep hold of it for a bit, this sort of much better feeling and a true sense of who I am and my identity, which is a good egg, essentially. I mean no one, no harm. I want everyone that comes into my orbit to have a lovely time, and they do. My friends came up, who I don't know as well as some other friends, but they came to visit me. We had a fire. I fed them. I could see the joy in their faces being in my environment, and I had joy in my face interacting with them. All I want to do is just enjoy other people and, not meddle with things or manipulate or boss people around or be controlling. All those things I carried around thinking I was, because that's not me. And I'm amazing, and I'm I've come through a lot. I'm surprised I'm still here, but I do love myself now, and I have a lot of self-compassion, and we're working on it, basically.
And everyone who's listening right now is giving you a big hug as well, and thanking you for being here with us today. But before we go, do you have any words of wisdom for everyone that's listening?
I always have words of wisdom for it all the time. It's hard to pinpoint it, but there is light at the end of the tunnel. You've got to face it. Actually, for all the people with narcissistic traits out there, we could help you. We could talk this through. You could get help. It's a very tough pattern to break. It's very ingrained, but if we'd all talked about it and you guys accepted some of the anxiety in yourselves, were willing to face some of that, we could have shared it. It's a family problem. So any scapegoats out there, it's a family problem that you've been lumbered with, and bless your heart, it's really hard. It's really difficult. The gaslighting, the entitlement, the invalidation, the enabling is really hard to understand, because you actually had better relationships with them at certain points, being thrown under the bus completely, but you can come out of it because it's inevitable. You can't squish a life force down. You can't squish that vivacity. If you're willing to face yourself, you will find who you are, and it's worth it. Definitely worth it. A lot of work, but worth it.
Well, Heidi, I really want to thank you for being here with us today and sharing your story. And, you've been dealing with this your whole entire life, and there's so many people out there that are going through the exact same thing as you are. And today you really helped them. You gave so many people a lifeline as well to hear how you're doing, and, the way that you're dealing with things and the way you're viewing yourself now is important for other people to hear. So just a really big thank you for being here with us today.
Oh, thanks for having me. I've enjoyed it. It's been quite helpful to it's been running around in my head, all these sort of fragments of it, and to have it drawn together is great. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Heidi, for being a guest on our show today. And if you want to be a guest on our survivor stories like Heidi was today, please do go to our website at narcissistapocalypse.com. Top of the page, there's a button that says guest form. When you click on that button, it takes you to our guest form page. And there you can read all of our instructions and either send us an email at narcissistapocalypse@gmail.com or fill out our guest form and press the submit button. And please do send it in the format that we ask for. And if you are someone that needs support, we here at Narcissist Apocalypse have a support group. So at narcissistapocalypse.com, top of the page, there's a button that says support group. When you click on that button, it takes you to our very own safe social network. And inside, you'll see that we have Zoom meetings every Wednesday nights, Thursday afternoons, and Saturday nights. We also have forum boards for you to post on to get the validation that you need from survivors just like you. And it is a wonderful group of people on there, and you can share your experiences with all of them and make friends too. So if you need support, join our support group today. And if you need even more support, please do visit our friends at DomesticShelters.org. At DomesticShelters.org, they have articles and resources to help you make sense of what you are dealing with. They have every phone number, email address, and web address for shelters and agencies, no matter how big or small the town you are in. DomesticShelters.org has it there. It is a wonderful free resource and organization, so if you need extra support, please do go visit DomesticShelters.org. And we have another friend of the show called Shelter Movers. And Shelter Movers can be found at sheltermovers.com. And Shelter Movers helps survivors of domestic violence transition to a better and safer life. It is a volunteer organization, a donor-supported charitable organization as well. It is currently only in Canada, but they are looking to expand into the United States. And what they do is they help coordinate moves for people who are getting out of domestic violence. They help you to safety and get all of your things out of your home and into storage, all of your belongings into storage, and they can do this for your pets and livestock too. It is a wonderful organization, so if you need help from them or just want to donate to them, please go to sheltermovers.com. And that is it for today's episode. So for myself and Heidi, we hope you have a good night.